Hello everyone, Storm here, and today we'll be covering What If Nick Survived Part 2. In the last part, we covered all of Season 2 of The Walking Dead, and now we're going to be looking at a new frontier, which now has a few changes to start right off the bat. But obviously, if you missed the first part or need a recap, make sure you go check it out using the link in the description and comments section. Before we begin a new frontier, we do need to cover the time skip between the two seasons. Our three endings were Clementine and AJ along with Bonnie, Nick, and either Jane or Kenny, with the Jane ending also having the group at House. There's also Clem and AJ going to Wellington, but we'll ignore that one since it would just lead to Clem being alone like in canon. As for the Jane ending, the group would get robbed by the family they let in before Jane finds out she's pregnant. She does not take too kindly to this, as you may know from the game, and that leads to her demise. With low supplies and an even worse situation on their hands, Nick, Bonnie, and Clementine leave House. In the Kenny ending, he would still meet his same fate as in the flashbacks, but it would be cool to see Kenny, Nick, and Bonnie in the fire scene. We could have them sharing a genuine bond, almost as if it's a follow-up to the power plant scene from Season 2. That way, sticking together feels more rewarding in at least one ending. Also, no, I do not think Nick or Bonnie would tell Kenny to put on a seatbelt, and if they did, he is not listening to them. And he's definitely not letting them sit up front. This puts Nick, Bonnie, and Clementine on the road with AJ for a while until they meet Ava and join the new frontier. This change would take some getting used to due to Nick and Bonnie's past experiences with the big group, but I think it's their best option at this point. I'd love to see Bonnie and Ava form a bond, and both of them messing with Nick when he says or does something dumb. I think Bonnie would genuinely try to help Lingard through his addiction, given that she was a victim of her own addiction before meeting Leland and Dee. Nick is a bit happier with this group, but can't seem to shake his guilt about Sarah, Jane, and Luke. AJ eventually falls sick like in canon, so Bonnie uses her connection to Lingard to get easier access to the vancomycin. She then gives it to Nick so that he can give it to AJ away from the group. However, Nick gets chased back by walkers after AJ cries, leading to them being caught. Only this time it's even more chaotic since the group had to fight the walkers in the middle of the night. David makes the decision to excise Nick from the group, but he suspects Bonnie and Clem were somehow involved, so he wants to get rid of them too. Ava is upset by this and Clementine can try to lie, but David can reasonably tell she's lying. David also chooses to keep AJ with them so that they're not slowed down. He doesn't dislike Bonnie, and Nick and Clem are both looked down upon a little bit. The three leave the new frontier camp, but Ava later returns saying goodbye. She gives Bonnie a request from David to return as he respected her belief in Lingard and thought he was getting better with her there. Plus, Ava tried really hard to get him to reconsider, and this was the best offer she could get. With Bonnie there, she could keep an eye on AJ to try and get him better, and she could have a good life with the new frontier. Bonnie carefully considers this deal, talking to Nick and Clementine about it. Nick tells her to go for it, and that he and Clementine will be okay out here. Obviously, Clementine can give her opinion, but I think Bonnie would choose to return after a long goodbye. This puts Nick and Clementine alone, and they'd be forced to settle down at Prescott for a bit after some time. One day, they come across a man named Javier Garcia after stopping a truck that he was being kidnapped in. The two hold him up and attempt to bargain for the RV he's got. But for now, they head back to Prescott, where Clementine confronts the guy who gave her faulty bullets. Here, Clementine still fires at him, leading to Clem and Nick being locked up, with Javi joining them if he defends Clem. Trip or Eleanor escort Javier to the junkyard so that he can find his family, but Mariana is killed in the process. Clementine wants to stay behind and finish the fight, with Nick wanting to do the same. Seeing Mariana killed reminded him way too much of Sarah, and he can't let Javi lose his family. Javier buries his niece if he chooses to stay with them, or helps take care of Kate's injury if he left. Either way, the group gets attacked by the new frontier at Prescott, and Francine is killed during this attack. Nick is able to survive the onslaught, surprise surprise, along with the Cannon group. I'd love to see him try to talk to Gabe about his feelings after his outbursts to Conrad. Nick has been in very similar situations, both when he first met Clementine and when he killed Matthew. He wants to ensure that Gabe does not have to deal with the regrets that he has. The group carries on, meeting Jesus and splitting off from Kate and Eleanor. Conrad overhears the story from Nick and Clementine about the new frontier and he snaps. He tries to take Gabe hostage, and Javier can choose to shoot him or not. If he doesn't, Conrad is shot anyway by Nick. I honestly believe this to be a phenomenal follow-up to lots of what Nick has done so far. He fired a rash shot at Clementine and Matthew that were both terrible, and tried to convince Gabe from following that path with Conrad. But when Conrad took advantage of that kindness by using Gabe as a pawn, that forces Nick to essentially relapse and take Conrad down himself. Gabe will gain admiration for Nick saving him, but this is where Clem and Nick have to leave. They can't risk being killed or worse by the new frontier, so they are forced to part ways with Javi. But before they go, they tell him to keep an eye out for a woman named Bonnie. Javier continues on with the others, but does have the option to tell Trip that Nick shot Conrad. He explains the full situation and Tripp is upset about it, but understands as long as Javi's telling the truth. The group makes it to New Richmond with Kate in Javier's arms. It's then that his brother David steps outside and takes Kate and Gabe in. Pretty much everything continues the same from there, though Javi would likely question David about Bonnie. There, he's told she was relocated somewhere else. Past this, the group gets kicked out and goes to the spot Ava gave them. On their way, Javier is attacked by walkers, but luckily Nick and Clem make a grand return to save him. Once they regroup, Tripp would either be happy to see them or would be distrusting of them due to Javi telling Tripp what happened with Conrad. Nick is surprised to hear that Javier told Tripp, but Clem alleviates that problem as it's understandable why he'd do that. Tripp inquires about the truth of what Javier said by asking Nick and Clementine exactly how it went down. They give him a recap. It's the exact same as what Javier said, which leads them to believe that they're telling the truth. Javi can then reward Nick saving him with Conrad's gun or choose to keep it. Now this makes Nick open to being killed by the walkers if you didn't give him the gun. However, the story would more or less go the same from there, except with Bonnie in the future, I guess. So we'll just stick with the version where Javi gives Nick the gun. Everyone is able to make it inside, Nick included, and they let David in as well. Though Nick and Clementine are understandably upset about the whole AJ situation, they are happy to hear that he lived, and Bonnie should be out there with him somewhere. After this, the crew takes on Max, Badger, and Lonnie, only for Lonnie to escape. Badger is taken down by Javier, leaving only Max in the building. When questioning him at gunpoint, Max utters that he has nothing to say, which leads to Nick shooting him out of the blue. Everyone is shocked as Max could have had key info, but Nick isn't really concerned about that. Clem is out there with the purpose of fighting Lonnie, Bonnie and AJ are out there, Javi, David, and Tripp's people are in Richmond. They can't waste time on someone who's led them astray in the past. Tripp is pretty angry as Nick's trigger finger really calls into question what happened with Conrad, even though it is true. As Javi, you can understand since David and Tripp are both against him, or you can berate him too. This will cause Nick to leave, and the group follows to meet Clem and Jesus. If you defended Nick or stayed neutral, Javi will just suggest that they go now, and hope Clem and Jesus had luck with Lonnie. Sadly, they did not, and Jesus decides to leave before criticizing Javi and Nick for their decisions to kill. After arriving at Richmond, the gang splits up, and not much changes here. Javi and David get locked up, but Kate or Gabe break Javier out after David is taken. Gabe and Javier find Ava, and the three raid the armory. Javi gets stabbed in a fight before getting patched up by Clementine. Nick is also there in order to talk to Lingard about Bonnie and AJ's location. But once the doctor wakes up, he makes them an offer to trade his life for the information. Clementine is intrigued by that, but Nick says no. After facing his own thoughts and dealing with Sarah and Jane's issues, he has a strong conviction against giving up like that. Javier is somewhat surprised at Nick being a lot less quick to act here, and that's just because it's so important to Nick. With Clem and Nick at opposite ends, Javier gets to make the real choice. Back at the base, the group discusses the plan to take down Joan. Gabe gets angry though, which leads to them exposing that Javier or Nick killed Conrad. Either way, Tripp will be angry at both of them for not telling him what happened, unless Javier did previously. Then he'd just get mad at Gabe for using his friend's death as a weapon. Anyway, the plan goes exactly the same, but with Nick also being present for the truck ordeal. The rest of the episode happens the same way, though Nick angrily shoots Joan if Javier accepts the deal. This sparks a shootout, which ends in Kate hitting the wall with the truck and letting the herd into Richmond. Everyone makes their escape and they regroup once more, with whoever Javier chose to die showing up too. It's here that Nick decides to stay behind with Eleanor and try to save lives, since he'd feel bad about either killing Joan or Max. If he didn't do those things, maybe they could have solved things more peacefully and not have so many casualties. Clementine says goodbye to Nick, and the two hope to see each other once this is all done. From there, we get pretty much the same exact game up until the point where David leaves with Gabe. Since Clementine didn't have the choice to inject AJ or not, as Nick handled that part, I think we can just replace this choice's result with how the Lingard situation went. So this is what your ending would look like based on whether Javi euthanized Lingard or not. This gives us our endings, which go basically the same as in canon. The one exception is that if Clementine went with Kate, she will survive since Nick is there at Richmond to back them up. So the only real way Kate can die is if both Javi and Clementine go after Gabe and David. If Lingard was alive, he gives Clementine and Nick the location of Bonnie and AJ at McCarroll Ranch, and the two go on their way. But that is basically all I've got for A New Frontier for this story. I know it's kind of short, but I mean, A New Frontier doesn't really focus on Clementine and her group, so it makes sense why that would be short. Even then, it's kind of cool to imagine Nick and Gabe having some sort of bond, and also seeing Nick and Clementine be at odds and not just be buddy-buddy the entire season. Showing that Nick hasn't fully completed his journey is also really cool because, I mean, expanding his character is always great. if you want to keep a character around for longer. So having him still have that trigger finger problem and relapsing for it in order to prevent Gabe from doing it, and also being frustrated and trying to think about the best interest of the group and making the hard calls, it's really something that I think Nick would struggle with after losing so many people. But let me know what you guys think. As always, a big shout out to our members: Elliot Plug 2, Davisville84, Willie, Aiden Kern, Zombie Warlord, Yeah, Tifu A, and Chief Straight Up Constituent. But as always, tell me if you like this part, tell me what you think will happen next, comment your requests for future videos, and subscribe. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.